I've got a little story for you today. We all like a story, don't we? This is about an MP and a councillor. And it's very interesting how two people who claim to have the best interests of their constituents and the place that they work in have a very different take on what that looks like. So please do like, subscribe and share, particularly share if you're in these constituencies, just to garner public opinion on what people think about this, because I think this is quite eye-opening. So let's start with Alex Baker MP. Now, Alex is the MP for Aldershot, Farnborough, Blackwater, Hawley and Yateley. Alex had a meeting with Bridget Phillipson the other day, and Alex said this about the meeting. I met with the Secretary of State for Education, Bridget Phillipson, last week to discuss the government's plans to give every child the best start in life. She then goes on to talk about the plans they discussed. At the end of this, Alex says, in this day and age, a child's background should not determine their future success. So I'm excited by this plan. The aim is, and then she goes into what the aim is for the plan, but she very clearly says, in this day and age, a child's background should not determine their future success. So I'm excited by this plan. Well, Alex has had emails from quite a few residents in her constituency about VAT on education. And one particular resident has shared those emails with me, so I can see what Alex wrote and I can see what this constituent wrote. So I've got all the facts in front of me. Now, Alex has said historically, and this was written last year before January, before VAT came in, Alex said, I should also add that Labour have already said we won't introduce the VAT change in time for this school year. So you should know that even if there is an increase, it won't take effect before September 25. So Alex has clearly been given duff information from Bridget, who she had her meeting with the other day. I wonder if she brought that up with her. And Alex has been made to look a little bit silly, or Alex has lied. I'm going to give Alex the benefit of the doubt. I don't think she knowingly did that. I think she was given the wrong information, which again is another example of how the left hand doesn't talk to the right hand in Labour, because they're learning on the job. In this message, Alex says, I don't relish removing VAT and exemption on private school fees. My mum taught in a private school and I know how parents like you scrimp and save to try and give their children the best start in life. So we've acknowledged a group of parents who aren't wealthy, who don't have broad shoulders, who cannot absorb the VAT rise. We've acknowledged that they exist, and we've acknowledged that they want the best for their children in life. As she said earlier, that everybody should have the best for their children in life, and their background shouldn't determine what that is. But clearly, the background of a child in an independent school does determine what that outcome looks like. So Alex goes on to say, as someone who lives here, I want to be able to send my children to a great local school, and I want that opportunity for all of my neighbours. So Alex is saying that her aspirations she wants for all of her neighbours. We don't know whether her neighbours want it or not, but Alex is driven by what she wants for the people in her community. She then goes on to say, I equally support parents who are trying to do right by their kids in this situation by finding money for private education. So she sounds like she supports people who want to do something different to her aspirations. It sounds like she supports people who want to send their children to a different form of schooling, but she also supports a VAT measure which is adversely affecting those children. And let's remind ourselves what Alex said. Alex said in her post about meeting with the Secretary of State, in this day and age, a child's background should not determine their future success. Yet clearly, a child's background, if it is from the independent sector, does determine their future success because 20% has been added onto their school fees. So Alex has got herself in a bit of a sticky situation there. Also, it's very interesting to note that in Alex's constituency, the independent sector share their resources with the state sector. So the independent sector allow the state sector at no cost, with no VAT charged on it, to use their resources, playing fields, sports fields, etc., etc. So that's a good thing, we would assume. That is benefiting all children, despite their background. And I use the word despite. So we move on to my next story, which is Councillor Yip. Now, Councillor Yip works in Birmingham. Councillor Yip is the let me find you the details for Councillor Alex Yip. Councillor Alex Yip is the Birmingham City Councillor for Sutton Wild Green and the Shadow Cabinet Member for Social Justice, Community Safety and Equalities. Now, Councillor Yip is a magistrate and a school governor at several schools across Birmingham, and has also been an English teacher and has special interest in vulnerable children with a specific focus on children with SEND, home to school transport and EHCPs. So that's Councillor Yip's background. Councillor Yip clearly has knowledge of education and children. Now, Councillor Yip does a speech to his mayor and to his other councillors in Birmingham. And in that, Councillor Yip says 12 schools have closed in Birmingham, 12 independent schools, leaving 1,500 children with nowhere to go to school. Now, Birmingham already needs 1,880 school places. They are short of 1,880 school places. This might not have been in the headlines because it doesn't make for good optics, does it? Particularly when Bridget Phillipson is talking about declining birth rates and less of a need for school places, yet clearly not in Birmingham, where they're already down 1,880 places. So you add to that the 1,500 that have left the 12 local schools who all cited VAT and national insurance as the reasons that they closed. So 12 schools have closed, 1,500 kids need a place on top of the 1,880. So we're looking for 3,380 places. Now, that's not cheap. We already don't have the 1,800, but we've now got an extra 1,500. Councillor Yip says 1,500 children are leaving independent schools in Birmingham, adding 10 million in costs to the already stretched local authority. So you may remember Birmingham Council weren't able to empty the bins. One side of the street that was Conservative were, one side of the street that was Labour weren't. So we've already got very, publicly a council that is not managing or not able to deal with the financial constraints on its budget. And we've now got an extra £10 million strain on that budget from trying to house these kids with a school. So the closure of 12 independent schools, which again would have contributed to the economy in Birmingham, has now cost the economy in Birmingham £10 million. So Councillor Yip goes on to say, has Birmingham received any financial compensation for the financial pressure, and will the Cabinet Minister commit to lobbying the government to urgently rethink this damaging policy before it causes lasting harm to both state and independent schools in our city? So Councillor Yip is not singling out one side. Councillor Yip is saying state education is being harmed and the independent sector is being harmed. Councillor Yip is talking factually about what the factual ramifications of VAT on education are, and is asking if Birmingham has received financial compensation for this policy. Now that strikes me as something extraordinary, that Councillor Yip is asking the government to financially compensate a council for a manifesto, a flagship manifesto of VAT on education that it imposed in January, not September this year when it was supposed to have been imposed, but January. So we are trying to compensate for a failed policy. That's at the stage we're at. We're told this policy was going to raise £1.5 billion and go into education. We then learnt that it wasn't going to raise anywhere near that. We then learnt that it wasn't going to support 6,500 new teachers. We then learnt it wasn't even going into education, it was going into social housing. We then learnt that it was going to cost the Treasury, not make any revenue. And now we are compensating councils for the impact, the negative impact that VAT on education is having on the local councils. So in Farnborough, we are saying everybody, no matter what your background, should have an equal success or an equal opportunity to success, whilst we are adversely affecting the education of a demographic of children with a particular background from where they come from. And in Birmingham, we're not saying any of that. We're simply saying 12 schools have closed. We're already 1,880 places short. We are now an extra 1,500 places short, and it's going to cost £10 million. Who's going to pay for it? We don't have the money. Will you compensate us for your failed policy? So two areas that are both negatively feeling the impact of VAT on education. Now, something interesting in this as well was the mayor in Birmingham said there would be a limited impact. Now, we don't know whether the mayor said this at the beginning of VAT on education, or now we know these facts? Because I would say 12 schools closing, 1,500 kids being displaced and a 10 million cost to the council is not a limited impact. I would say that's a huge impact. The mayor also said he doesn't know what the overall situation is going to be because this is a new situation. Now, that worries me significantly, that we don't know what the negative outcome could be or what the positive outcome could be because we didn't do a risk assessment. We didn't do the research. So now the figures are coming out that this is costing local authorities. And of course, let's remind you that when Bridget Phillipson says that new independent schools are opening, the independent schools that are opening are the small special educational needs schools, we've talked about this, which are funded by the local authority through children with EHCPs, educational healthcare plans. So when the educational healthcare plans are removed, which is what we are hearing, they are slated for removal in the autumn white paper, who will then fund those special educational needs schools? They're not mainstream independent schools. They are small niche schools for kids with SEND needs, and they're funded by local authorities, the taxpayer. So we're being told a soup of facts and figures, but the reality is what's happening in Birmingham and Farnborough. Schools are closing. There aren't enough places. When you go through the list of schools that don't have enough places, I wrote it down somewhere. It's all starting with the B's. There are Bolton needs 590 places, Bedford needs 670, Bath needs 220, and Barnsley needs 590. That's just some of the B's of the school places that are already needed in the UK today. That's not accounting for the kids leaving independent schools. So this is going to come to at a cost to every local council. If you don't think you've got enough being spent on your bins or your Christmas lights or your local services or your local infrastructure or your doctor's surgeries or your potholes, you can kiss goodbye to any of that coming up in the next financial year, because Birmingham is already footing a £10 million bill from VAT on education. Now you tell me whether that maths makes sense.